I'm Thea Anders, and at 28, I learned my own name had been crossed out of my parents' will, erased in black ink, like a line item that didn't perform. My mother looked me in the face that afternoon and called me their biggest disappointment. My father sat 3 feet away and said nothing. They handed my sister the $4 million family estate: the house, the business, the rental cottages, the land, everything our grandmother built, and left me a check for $1. I thought that was the worst part. It wasn't. What my sister had done behind my back to make it happen was worse. And what I did about it, 3 years later, when my lawyer picked up the phone and called theirs, that's the part my father still can't explain. He just kept repeating the same thing over and over, like saying it enough times might make it stop being true. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The morning everything cracked open started with a family meeting at my grandmother's house. I drove 4 hours thinking we'd discuss her estate together, as a family. Turns out, the decisions had already been made. I was the only one who didn't know. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. Quiet stories about people who got underestimated and the dignity they built when no one was watching. If someone in your family ever made you feel like a disappointment for choosing your own path, this one's for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Marietta, Ohio, is the kind of town where your family name means something whether you want it to or not. The Anders family had been there since the 1940s, and the house, a wide colonial revival that my grandmother Ruth restored board by board in the early 80s, sat on Putnam Street like it owned the block. Heart pine staircase, bay windows with original wavy glass, a wraparound porch that creaked in a way that sounded like home when I was 9. I hadn't lived there in 6 years, but every time I walked through that front door the smell hit the same: lemon oil, old wood, and something warmer underneath that I could never name. That October afternoon, I parked behind my sister Lauren's new SUV and noticed the driveway had been repaved. Small detail. Stuck with me. Inside, the dining room table was set like a meeting. Folders, water glasses, a notepad at each seat. My father Roger stood by the window looking at something in the yard. My mother Diane sat at the head of the table, which was unusual because that was Grandma Ruth's chair. The family's estate attorney, Mr. Kimball, was already seated, envelope in front of him. Lauren was on her phone, legs crossed, not looking up. "Sit down, Thea," my mother said. "No hello." I sat. Mr. Kimball opened the envelope, and my mother watched me with an expression I couldn't read. Not anger exactly. Not pity. Something rehearsed. I remember the heart pine under my shoes. The grain ran toward the staircase. I remember thinking how strange it was that I noticed the floor at a moment like that. Mr. Kimball read the revised will in that flat legal tone that makes everything sound like weather. The house on Putnam Street, the 2 rental cottages on Front Street, the family furniture store on 2nd, the savings accounts, the land. Total appraised value just under $4 million. All of it transferred to Lauren Marie Anders Pruitt. My share of the estate was listed on a separate line: $1. The no contest clause underneath it meant if I challenged anything, I'd lose even that. Lauren didn't react. She already knew. I could see it in the way her posture didn't shift, the way she kept her phone face down on the table like she'd been waiting for this part to be over. My mother was the one who spoke. She straightened in Grandma Ruth's chair, looked at me over her reading glasses, and smiled. Not a warm smile, not even a mean one, just a small pressed lip thing that said she'd practiced this. "We discussed this carefully, Thea. Your father and I both agreed." She paused. "You were always our biggest disappointment." The room didn't go quiet because it was already quiet. My ears filled with a low hum. I gripped the edge of the staircase banister behind my chair because the floor felt like it had tilted 2 degrees. My father looked at the yard. Mr. Kimball closed the folder. Lauren uncrossed her legs and stood, as if the meeting was done. I sat there with one hand on heart pine and $1 from the estate that was supposed to be mine, and the only coherent thought I had was a question I didn't ask out loud. How long had my sister known before I walked in? My mother had reasons, and she delivered them like a woman who'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. "I threw away the family path," she said. "Grandma Ruth built the store. My father grew it. Lauren married well and stayed close. And I left to do," her word, "decorating." She said it the way someone says, "finger painting." My father still hadn't spoken. He stood at the window with his hands in his pockets, and every few seconds he nodded, just slightly, like a man agreeing with something playing on a radio in another room. "We sacrificed everything to build respectable lives here," my mother said. "Your sister understood that. You didn't." I wanted to remind her that I had a degree in interior design, that I'd worked 60-hour weeks at a firm in Columbus before going independent, that decorating was a career with licensure and liability and clients who trusted me with six-figure budgets. But she wasn't done. "People talk, Thea. They've told us you're in debt, that you can't hold down clients, that you're unstable." Unstable. The word landed like a slap. I'd never missed a rent payment. I'd never borrowed $1 from anyone in that room. I'd never been fired, never been sued, never been late on a tax return. So who exactly had been telling my parents I was falling apart? I looked at Lauren. She was pouring herself water, calm as Sunday. My mother kept talking. Something about how they didn't make this choice lightly, how it was really about protecting what the family built. But I'd stopped hearing the content. I was doing math. Unstable. In debt. Can't hold down clients. Someone had spent a long time building that version of me, and I was sitting across the table from her. It didn't come at once. It came in pieces over the next hour, between the legal papers and the water refills, and my mother repeating herself like the will had a director's commentary. My father's old college friend, Gerald Bishop, had apparently told my parents that I'd asked him for a loan. I hadn't. Gerald's wife, Martha, had mentioned at a church luncheon that she'd heard I was having trouble. Her exact words. From whom? She couldn't remember. My mother said 3 different neighbors had expressed concern. 3 different neighbors who all happened to be people Lauren saw regularly. And then, there was the thing Lauren said at a family barbecue last 4th of July, in front of 12 people, including my aunt and 2 cousins. I wasn't there. Megan, my cousin, told me later in a text I'd missed. Lauren had held a glass of sweet tea and said lightly, like she was making an observation about the weather, "Thea can't even keep a houseplant alive." 12 people laughed. My aunt changed the subject. But the line stuck. It stuck because it was small enough to be funny and sharp enough to be a verdict. It wasn't about houseplants. It was about competence. And Lauren had been running that campaign for almost 2 years. A word here, a concerned sigh there, a little headshake when someone mentioned my name. Until the version of me that existed in Marietta was someone I'd never met. A mess. A flight risk. A girl who couldn't even keep a houseplant alive. By the time my parents revised the will, they weren't cutting out their daughter. They were cutting out a character Lauren had written for me. I just hadn't been in the audience. The one thing in that will that didn't go to Lauren was a cedar box. Grandma Ruth left it to me specifically, by name, in a clause Mr. Kimball read almost as an afterthought. A small box made of eastern red cedar, brass hinges, a tiny latch that clicked when you opened it. I'd seen it on her dresser my whole life, but I'd never looked inside. She died 11 months before the family meeting, and the box had been sitting in a storage closet at the house since the funeral. My mother brought it out and set it in front of me like it was a consolation prize. Lauren looked at it and then at me. "She left you a box," she said. "Fitting." I picked it up. It was lighter than I expected. The cedar smell was still strong. That sharp, clean scent that meant Grandma's bedroom, Grandma's hands, Grandma measuring fabric at her sewing table with a little brass measuring tape she'd had since before I was born. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Not in that room. Not in front of the people who'd just reduced me to $1 and a cardboard box. "I'll keep it," I said. "Thank you." Lauren looked at my mother. My mother looked at the table. My father looked at the yard. Nobody asked me to stay. Nobody asked me how I felt. Nobody said they were sorry, or that this was hard, or that it didn't mean they didn't love me. The cedar box sat in my hands like a small sealed question. Why had Grandma Ruth, who could have left me money or furniture or a share of the land, left me this instead? I tucked it under my arm. I didn't open it for 5 months. I drove to a motel outside town that night and sat on a bed that smelled like bleach and thought about what fighting would look like. I could hire an attorney. I could argue undue influence, or that Lauren had manipulated the process, or that my mother's stated reasons were based on fabricated information. I could drag it into probate court and let a judge in Washington County sort out whether disappointment was a legal basis for disinheritance. I ran the numbers. It would take 2 years minimum, cost me money I didn't have, and even if I won, I'd spend the rest of my life in a town that had already decided what I was. My parents would never speak to me again. Lauren would tell everyone I sued my own family. The neighbors would nod and say, "See? Unstable. Just like we heard." So I made a different choice. I would not fight for a seat at a table that had erased me. I would build my own table somewhere else. I picked Asheville, North Carolina, because a designer I'd worked with once told me the historic housing stock was gorgeous, the renovation market was growing, and nobody there would know or care that Thea Anders was somebody's biggest disappointment. I called my landlord in Columbus and gave 30 days' notice. I sold my couch, my bookshelf, and my coffee table. Things I'd picked out with care, because that's what designers do. We choose things. And netted $1,100. I loaded my car with clothes, a drafting kit, a laptop, and Grandma Ruth's cedar box. It sat on the passenger seat, still sealed. I pulled out of the motel parking lot at 6 in the morning, and Marietta shrank in my rearview mirror until it was just a smudge on a gray Ohio sky. 7 hours on I-77 South. I counted the miles in state lines, Ohio to West Virginia to North Carolina. My bank account had $3,200. My credit score was 740 because I'd never missed a payment, no matter what Lauren told the neighbors. I had no job waiting, no apartment secured, just a listing I'd found for a furnished room above a frame shop on Haywood Road in West Asheville for $650 a month. The room was smaller than my old closet. One window, one radiator, one outlet that worked reliably. I set Grandma Ruth's cedar box on the windowsill that first night and sat on the twin bed and stared at it. The latch caught the streetlight. My hand went out. I touched the brass hinges. I almost opened it. My thumb was on the clasp when something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a sense that whatever was inside was the last new thing Grandma Ruth would ever give me, and once I opened it, that would be done too. I pulled my hand back. My fingers were shaking, and I told myself it was the cold. "You were always our biggest disappointment." The words sat in my skull like furniture I hadn't asked for. They were there when I brushed my teeth. There when I turned off the light. There when I lay in a strange bed in a strange city and listened to the radiator tick. I didn't know if interior design could support me in a town where I knew no one. I didn't know if I'd ever stop hearing my mother's voice in every quiet room. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was not going back. Whatever I was about to build, it would be mine. No one else's name on it. No one else's permission required. The first 6 months in Asheville were the hardest stretch of my adult life. I got a part-time job at a furniture showroom on Biltmore Avenue, $12 an hour, employee discount I couldn't afford to use. Mornings, I'd stage the floor displays. Afternoons, I'd pitch myself to realtors as a freelance home stager for listings under $300,000. Most of them said no. The ones who said yes paid between $200 and $400 per job, cash. I ate rice and black beans 4 nights a week. I washed my hair with bar soap for 2 months because shampoo felt like a luxury I hadn't earned yet. I slept on the floor of my room for 3 weeks before a client's leftover staging sofa became mine. I studied for my North Carolina registered interior designer credential at the kitchen counter of the frame shop downstairs, where the owner let me use the Wi-Fi after hours in exchange for reorganizing his display wall. I filed the LLC paperwork myself. $60. I read every clause twice. Nobody helped me. Nobody checked in. I didn't call home, and home didn't call me. But there was a moment, small, easy to miss, that kept me from quitting. A realtor named Deborah in Montford had me stage a 1920s bungalow that had been sitting on the market for 90 days. I walked through the rooms and saw what they could be. I moved the furniture, changed the lighting angles, brought in 2 borrowed plants and a linen runner. Deborah came back for the photos and stopped in the living room doorway. "You see space differently," she said. It wasn't a big compliment. It wasn't a career. But it was the first time in 6 months that someone looked at my work and didn't see a disappointment. I met Nathan Cole on a Tuesday in March, in a half-gutted kitchen in Montford. Deborah had referred me to a homeowner who wanted a full interior redesign of a 1910 Craftsman, and when I showed up with my binder and my measuring tape, not Grandma's, the cheap one from the hardware store, there was already a man standing in the framing, studying the joists. Nathan was a general contractor who specialized in historic homes. Broad shoulders, paint-flecked boots, a level clip to his belt like other people carry phones. He'd been restoring houses in western North Carolina for 11 years. He looked at my preliminary sketches and stopped on the one where I'd rerouted the pantry wall to save the original built-in china cabinet. "That's a load-bearing wall," he said. I pointed to the beam transfer I'd drawn. He looked at it for a long time. "You drew a structural solution inside a design sketch," he said. "Most designers just draw the pretty version and let me figure out the rest." That was the beginning. Nathan didn't offer me money. He didn't rescue me. He offered something more practical. A partnership. He said if I could design restorations that respected the original bones of a house, he could build them. 50-50, transparent books, separate roles. I hesitated. Not because the deal was bad, because for a year I'd been proving I could do everything alone, and saying yes to a partner felt like admitting I couldn't. Perfectionism. Over-responsibility. The habit of carrying everything yourself because the last time you trusted a group, they voted you out of the family. I said yes anyway. "You design it right? I'll build it right." We shook hands in a kitchen with no floor. We called the firm Larkspur Design Plus Build. Nathan's idea. Larkspurs grow wild in the Carolina mountains, and he said they looked delicate but had root systems that could crack concrete. I liked that. Our first real project was a 1924 bungalow in West Asheville, the same street where my rented room sat above the frame shop. The homeowner was a retired English teacher named Doris, who wanted the house brought back to what it had been when her parents bought it. Original molding profiles, period-appropriate hardware, and a heart pine staircase that had been carpeted over in the 70s. The day we pulled the carpet and found the wood underneath. Tight grain, amber dark, not a single board rotted. I stood at the bottom and put my hand on the banister and felt something move in my chest. It was the same species of wood, the same era, the same hand-milled texture as the staircase in Grandma Ruth's house on Putnam Street. I hadn't thought about that staircase in months. I'd trained myself not to. But standing in Doris's house with a pry bar in one hand and sawdust on my jeans, I understood something I hadn't been ready to name. I kept choosing old houses because I was trying to save the one I'd lost. Not the estate, not the money, the staircase, the wood that remembers feet. The original lines my grandmother spent years restoring because she believed a house should look like what it was, not what someone forced it to become. Doris's bungalow took 4 months. We came in under budget by $800. She cried when she saw the staircase. I didn't cry. I took a photo and pinned it above my desk. Cousin Megan texted me on a Saturday while I was sanding cabinet doors. She was the only family member who still talked to me, and even she kept it quiet. Short texts, no calls, nothing that would show up if Lauren checked her phone. "Lauren bought a Range Rover," Megan wrote. "She's redoing Grandma's kitchen. White marble, everything. Your mom is thrilled." I put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. I didn't respond for 3 hours. When I did, I typed, "How's the house?" Megan sent a photo. The dining room wallpaper, hand-printed 1920s reproduction that Grandma Ruth had sourced from a mill in Vermont, had been stripped and replaced with a gray accent wall. I closed the photo. There was a second message, the kind Megan sent when she was whispering even over text. "People still talk about you like you fell off a cliff. Lauren told Aunt Janet you owed $10,000 to a credit card company. I know that's not true, but nobody asks me." $10,000. I'd never carried a balance over 400. I was living on rice and staging fees and 50-50 splits with a contractor I'd known for 4 months. But in Marietta, the version Lauren had built was still walking around wearing my name, owing debts I'd never taken, failing in ways I'd never failed. I put the phone in a drawer. I went back to the cabinet doors. That's how I dealt with it. I sanded something until the surface was smooth, and the original grain showed through. If that sounds like a metaphor, it wasn't. It was Wednesday, and the cabinets were due Friday. If this story is hitting close to home, If someone in your family made you feel small for choosing your own path, stay with me. The part where it turns around is coming. Drop a comment with one dream they told you to give up. And subscribe so the next story finds you. 3 weeks later, Megan sent something else. Not a text this time, a screenshot. A family group chat on iMessage that had been running for over a year. Lauren, my mother, Aunt Janet, 2 cousins, and Gerald Bishop's wife, Martha. I wasn't in it. I'd never been in it. The messages scrolled back months. Lauren, November. Just checking in. Has anyone heard from Thea? I'm worried about her. My mother. She hasn't called. Probably for the best. Lauren, December. A friend of hers told me she's drowning in debt. I don't want to gossip, but I think we should be prepared if she asks for money. My mother's response was a heart emoji. January. Lauren again. It breaks my heart to say this, but Thea has always been embarrassing. Remember when she told Grandma she wanted to be a designer and Grandma just went quiet? My mother. Ruth never said anything because she didn't want to hurt Thea's feelings. She knew. That was a lie. Grandma Ruth was the one person who'd told me I had a gift. She was the one who let me measure fabric at her sewing table. She was the one who said, "You see what other people walk past." February. Lauren to the group. I think removing Thea from the will is the kindest thing. She'll just waste it. Martha Bishop, thumbs up. Aunt Janet. Sad but probably true. My mother. Agreed. I read the whole thread sitting on the floor of my studio with sawdust in my hair. The disappointment label hadn't grown organically. It had been planted, watered, fertilized in a group chat I was never meant to see. My parents didn't disown a daughter. They disowned a straw man my sister built in a text thread, and they never once asked me if any of it was real. That night, I sat on the floor with the cedar box on my lap. 5 months I'd carried it from Ohio to North Carolina, windowsill to nightstand to the shelf above my drafting desk, and never once lifted the latch. The brass was tarnished now. The cedar smell had faded to something you had to press your nose against the wood to find. I slid the latch. Inside, nested in a piece of white flannel, were 3 things. The first was Grandma Ruth's brass measuring tape. The one she'd used at her sewing table. The one she'd used when she measured the original window casings of the Putnam Street house before she restored them. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, warm-colored, with tiny etched numbers that had been worn smooth at the 1 inch and the 12. The second was a folded set of architectural drawings, hand-drafted on onion skin paper, dated 1983, showing the full restoration plan for the Putnam Street house. Floor plans, elevation details, notes in pencil about the heart pine staircase, the bay window framing, the original plaster crown. Grandma Ruth's handwriting, small and certain. And the third was a letter. 1 page, blue ink, written on stationery from the furniture store. Dear Thea, it began. If you're reading this, they've already decided you're the difficult one. I set down the measuring tape. I unfolded the letter on the floor of a studio apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, and read the rest of it by the light of a desk lamp I'd bought for $9 at a thrift store. The woman who raised me to see what other people walk past had seen this coming. She'd packed a box for me the way you pack a lifeboat, and she'd sealed it with cedar to keep the moths out. Grandma Ruth's letter was not long. She didn't waste words. She wrote that she'd watched my mother favor Lauren for years, and that she'd spoken to my father about it once. He'd told her to stay out of it. She wrote that she knew Lauren talked about me behind my back, and that she told Lauren to stop. And that Lauren had smiled and changed the subject the way people do when they have no intention of listening. She wrote that she was leaving me the measuring tape and the blueprints instead of money because money gets spent but tools last, and because the house on Putnam Street was the only thing she ever truly built, and she wanted the one person in the family who understood building to have the plans. She wrote, "They will call you a disappointment. That's the family's word for someone who wouldn't shrink." And at the bottom, in smaller handwriting, like she'd added it later, "This house was the only thing I ever truly built. Don't let it become a stranger's." I read the letter 3 times. I pinned the blueprints above my desk, next to the photo of Doris's staircase, and I kept Grandma's brass measuring tape in my drafting bag from that day forward. I used it on every project. Not because it was more accurate than a modern one, but because every time I pulled it out, I was measuring with her hands. The cedar box stayed on my shelf. Open now, the flannel folded neatly inside. It smelled like her dresser, like lemon oil and old wood and something warmer underneath that I still couldn't name. It smelled like the staircase on Putnam Street. I didn't know yet that I'd see that staircase again. But the blueprints were on my wall, and the tape was in my bag, and the letter was in my chest pocket. I was carrying the whole house with me already. Over the next 18 months, Larkspur grew the way old houses do, slowly, one good decision at a time. The Montford bungalow led to a farmhouse in Black Mountain. The farmhouse led to a referral from a preservation society for a 1905 Queen Anne in Hendersonville. Nathan and I hired our first employee, a Finnish carpenter named Ray, who could match century-old trim profiles by eye. Then a project manager, then a part-time bookkeeper. We weren't rich. We were busy, which in the design-build world is better because it means someone trusts you with their home and then tells a friend. I measured every new project with Grandma Ruth's brass tape. It became a habit, then a ritual. I'd walk through the empty rooms before we started demo, tape in hand, and take the measurements myself. Not because I didn't trust a laser, but because measuring by hand forced me to touch the walls, feel the plaster, notice where the floor dipped and the trim had been replaced. I measured twice, the way she taught no one but me. That's what I told Nathan when he asked why I used a tape from the 1970s. He stopped asking after the third project. By month 22, a regional design magazine, Southern Shelter, contacted us about a feature. They'd seen our restoration portfolio online and wanted to photograph the Hendersonville Queen Anne. I said yes because the exposure was good for business. I said yes because referrals are currency. And I said yes because some small, quiet part of me wanted that article to exist in the world, where my name was still associated with failure. I didn't share it with anyone in Ohio. But I knew the internet doesn't care about state lines. The Southern Shelter feature ran in their spring issue, 4 pages, photographs of the Queen Anne's restored parlor, a pull quote from me about preserving the bones that matter. There was a picture of me on page 2, standing on a porch we'd rebuilt to match the 1905 original, holding a set of blueprints. Megan saw it first. She sent me a screenshot with no words, just 3 exclamation points. 2 days later, she texted again. Your mom saw it. Someone at church showed her. I waited. No call, no text from Diane, no message from Roger, no email from Lauren. Just a long, thick silence from Ohio that I could feel through the phone. Megan filled in the gaps the way she always did. Quietly, carefully, like she was reporting from behind enemy lines. Your mom said decorating magazines don't mean stability. Diane's words. Still the same playbook. A 4-page spread in a respected design publication, and my mother reduced it to a hobby. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was tired. The way you get tired of a song that keeps playing in a store you can't leave. But there was something else Megan mentioned, almost as an afterthought. I think something's going on with the house. Lauren's been weird about money. Your dad looks stressed. I didn't ask for details. I didn't call. I didn't send the article to anyone in Marietta or write a letter to my parents or post it online with a caption about proving people wrong. That wasn't the point. The point was the porch, the parlor, the brass tape in my hand. The point was that I was standing in a house I'd saved, and somewhere in Ohio, the house my grandmother saved was starting to rot from the inside. I just didn't know it yet. Here's what was happening in Marietta while I was rebuilding staircases in the Blue Ridge. Lauren closed the furniture store. She said the market had shifted, that people were buying online now, that foot traffic wasn't worth the overhead. My father, who'd run that store for 30 years, didn't argue. He signed the closing papers the way he signed everything, quietly, because Diane said it was fine and Lauren said it was necessary. The store building sold for less than it appraised. Lauren put the money into a boutique event planning business that she launched on Instagram with a reel of champagne towers and fairy lights. It lasted 8 months. Then she took a home equity loan against the Putnam Street house, the one Grandma Ruth restored, the one that had been in the family for decades, the one that was supposed to be the foundation of a $4 million legacy. She borrowed $380,000. My father co-signed because Lauren told him it was temporary, a bridge loan to cover the business losses until a new investor came through. The investor didn't come through. Lauren stopped making payments 4 months in. The bank sent notices. My father found them in a stack of mail Lauren had hidden in the hall closet. $380,000 against a house that was worth maybe $900,000 in good condition, and the condition wasn't good anymore. The Putnam Street house, the heart pine staircase, the bay windows, the wraparound porch that creaked like a lullaby, was heading toward foreclosure. And my parents, who still lived in the guest cottage on the same property, were about to lose the only address they'd ever known. Meanwhile, in Asheville, Larkspur was doing something I hadn't planned for. It was becoming known. Not famous, not viral. Known. The way a good firm gets known, by finishing projects on time and under budget, and by answering the phone when clients call on a Saturday. We'd completed 12 restorations in 2.5 years. Nathan handled the builds. I handled the design, the client relationships, and the business development, which is a fancy way of saying I drove to a lot of coffee meetings and shook a lot of hands. We had a crew of 6, a real office, a converted warehouse studio off Riverside Drive with a drafting room and a materials library I'd built shelf by shelf. We'd been featured twice more, once in a Preservation Alliance newsletter and once in a small segment on a regional public television show about Appalachian architecture. An investor group in Charlotte approached us about partnering on a larger-scale historic renovation, a former textile mill in the Piedmont being converted into mixed-use lofts. We said yes. That project alone was worth more than everything we'd done in year 1 combined. I started getting calls from outside the state. A developer in Savannah, a homeowner in Charlottesville, a historic trust in Lexington, Kentucky, asking if we did consulting. We weren't a boutique startup anymore. We were a firm. With revenue, with clients, with a reputation that had been built one restored porch at a time. We don't flip houses, I told a reporter from the Charlotte Observer who did a short piece on the mill project. We bring them back. That quote ran under a photograph of me and Nathan standing in the mill's original timber frame. I kept a copy in my desk drawer. Not to show anyone. Just to know it was there. Megan called on a Thursday in September. Not a text. A call. That meant it was bad. The house is being listed, she said. Lauren can't cover the loan. Your dad tried to refinance, but the bank said no. There's a developer from Columbus who wants to buy the lot and tear down the house to build a townhouse cluster. I was standing at my drafting desk. Grandma Ruth's blueprints were pinned to the wall directly in front of me. The elevation drawing of the front facade, the pencil notes about the staircase, the bay window dimensions in her small, certain handwriting. How bad is the house? I asked. Megan sent photos while we were still on the phone. I opened them one by one. The front porch had a visible sag on the east side. Water damage, probably a gutter Lauren never fixed. 2 of the bay windows had plywood patches where the original glass had cracked. The interior shots were worse. The heart pine staircase, the wood that remembers feet, had water stains running down the banister from a leak in the upstairs bathroom. The treads were warped. The original newel post, which Grandma Ruth had refinished by hand in 1984, had a crack running from the base to the first baluster. The house was dying. Not fast, not dramatically, the way houses fall in movies. Slowly, the way they fall in real life. One deferred repair at a time, one ignored drip. One owner who saw a house as an asset instead of a responsibility. I looked at the blueprints on my wall. I looked at the photos on my phone. And I heard Grandma's voice in the letter, small and clear. This house was the only thing I ever truly built. Don't let it become a stranger's. The developer from Columbus was a stranger, but I wasn't. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Lauren. I called Nathan. And then I called our attorney. The conversation was short. Larkspur had the cash flow and the investor relationships to make a competitive offer on the Putnam Street property. We could acquire it, restore it to Grandma Ruth's original plans, and use it as a flagship project for Larkspur's first out-of-state restoration, a portfolio piece that would anchor our expansion into the Ohio River Valley market. The business case was clean. The personal case was complicated. Nathan asked me once, over the phone, if this was about revenge. I told him no. He asked if it was about proving something. I told him no again. Then what is it about? He said. I looked at the blueprints on my wall. There's a house worth saving, I said. And I'm the only person left who knows what it's supposed to look like. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You design it right, I'll build it right." Our attorney drafted the offer under the firm's name, Larkspur Design Plus Build, LLC. No mention of Thea Anders, no personal contact with the sellers. Just a clean, cash-backed offer submitted through standard channels, with a condition: the buyer would preserve the historic character of the property in accordance with the original architectural plans. The seller's side, which, by then, was my father, because Lauren had frozen, would not know who was behind the offer until the walkthrough. I wasn't buying my way back in. I wasn't buying leverage. I wasn't buying the right to stand in my mother's dining room and say, "I told you so." I was buying a house worth saving. And if that made my family uncomfortable, that was a problem they'd built for themselves. If you've ever watched someone get handed everything you earned, you know the quiet kind of anger I'm describing. I didn't act on it the way you might think. Keep listening. The phone call that changed everything is almost here. And if you believe a person's worth isn't decided by their family, hit subscribe and stay with me. The phone call happened on a Tuesday at 2:15 in the afternoon. I know because I was sitting across from our attorney, Sarah, in her office on Patton Avenue when she dialed Mr. Kimball's number in Marietta. She'd drafted the offer letter. I'd approved the terms. All that was left was the call. I listened to her end of the conversation. Professional, measured, the way lawyers talk when money is on the table. She told Mr. Kimball that Larkspur Design Plus Build, based in Asheville, was submitting a cash-backed acquisition offer on the Putnam Street property. She outlined the price, the timeline, the inspection terms. And then she said the part that mattered. My client's offer includes a binding historic preservation clause. The original structure stays intact, specifically the staircase, the bay windows, and the front facade. Mr. Kimball, according to Sarah, went quiet for a long time. Then he asked why a firm from North Carolina would care about a staircase in Ohio. Sarah said, "My client has her reasons." The developer from Columbus had offered more, but with a demolition clause. Ours was lower by $40,000 and came with an insistence on saving the house that must have sounded strange to everyone on the other end. Lauren, who by this point was barely functioning, her husband had moved to a separate bedroom, her Instagram had gone dark, her event planning LLC had been dissolved, signed the acceptance without reading the details. My father signed because there was no other option. The bank wanted the loan resolved, and Larkspur's offer was the only one that didn't involve a wrecking ball. Due diligence took 3 weeks. Our attorney sent the standard inspection requests, the title search came back clean except for Lauren's lien, and the closing date was set for late October. Almost exactly 3 years after the family meeting where I'd been erased from the will. One condition remained. The buyer's principal would attend the final walkthrough in person. "Who's the principal?" my father asked the realtor. "She'll be there on Thursday," the realtor said. I wasn't there for what happened next in Ohio, but Megan told me later, in pieces, the way she always delivered bad news. Gently, like she was handing me something breakable. Lauren had a fight with my father the night before the walkthrough. She'd finally done the math on what the sale would cover after the lien, the back taxes, the realtor's commission, and the legal fees. The answer was almost nothing. The $4 million estate my parents had handed her 3 years ago had been ground down to a stack of debts and a house she'd neglected into near ruin. She called my mother. She blamed the economy, the contractor who'd done a bad job on the kitchen, the bank for not approving a second refinance. She blamed my father for co-signing. She blamed Grandma Ruth for leaving a house that was too old to maintain. She did not blame herself. My mother, for the first time Megan could remember, didn't comfort her. Diane sat in the guest cottage and stared at the wall and said, "This wasn't supposed to happen to me. Not to Lauren, not to the family. To me. That's who my mother was." Even with the house crumbling and the money gone and her favored daughter drowning in self-inflicted debt, Diane's first thought was about her own story. The respectable life she'd built, the name she'd protected, the image she'd curated for 30 years in a town that was now going to watch her lose her address. My father slept in his car that night. Megan found out because she drove past the cottage and saw his truck in the driveway with the seat reclined and the engine running for heat. She didn't knock. She said he looked like a man who'd run out of rooms to hide in. I left Asheville at 5 in the morning on a Thursday. 7 hours north. Same highway, opposite direction. 3 years earlier, I'd driven this road with $3,200 and a sealed cedar box. Now I drove it with a firm behind me, a restoration plan in my bag, and Grandma Ruth's brass measuring tape in my jacket pocket. The tape felt different this time. Heavier somehow. I'd measured 100 houses with it. Bungalows, farmhouses, Queen Anne's, a textile mill, a craftsman cottage that had been converted into a bookshop. Every time I pulled it out, the etched numbers told me the same thing. This is how much space you have, and this is what you can do with it. I'd never measured the Putnam Street house as an adult. I'd walked through it as a child, run up the staircase, pressed my face against the bay window to watch the snow. But I'd never stood in those rooms with a tape in my hand and seen them the way Grandma Ruth saw them, as dimensions and possibilities, as bones and light. That was about to change. I arrived in Marietta at noon. The town looked the same. The leaves were turning. The river was low. I parked on Front Street and sat in my car for 10 minutes, looking at nothing, breathing. Then I drove to Putnam Street. The Bishop's car was in their driveway, Gerald and Martha, the neighbors who'd passed along Lauren's gossip, who'd told my parents I'd asked for a loan I never asked for. They were attending the walkthrough. The realtor had invited them as a courtesy because they shared a property line. They'd be standing in the house when I walked in. I checked my jacket pocket. The tape was there. I got out of the car. The front porch sagged worse in person than it had in photos. The east side had dropped nearly 2 inches. I could see it in the roofline without measuring. The paint was peeling in sheets. One of the porch columns had a crack running vertically, and someone had tried to fill it with caulk, which had turned yellow and pulled away from the wood. I walked up the steps. The boards groaned. Inside, the house smelled different. Not lemon oil and warmth. Mildew, dust. The ghost of that hand-printed wallpaper Grandma Ruth had sourced from Vermont, now replaced by flat gray paint that was already bubbling near the baseboard. The realtor met me in the foyer, a woman named Catherine who shook my hand and led me toward the kitchen. In the kitchen, standing around the island Lauren had installed over the original hardwood, were Gerald and Martha Bishop, the family's estate attorney Mr. Kimball, my father, and the realtor's assistant. My father looked older. 3 years had done something to the skin around his eyes, the way he held his shoulders, the way he stood. Not at the window this time, but near the door, as if he was ready to leave a room he wasn't sure he belonged in. He was expecting a stranger. He was expecting the principal of some out-of-state firm he'd never heard of to walk in with a hard hat and a clipboard. Catherine turned to the group. "Everyone, this is the principal and lead designer of Larkspur Design Plus Build." I stepped forward. My father looked at me. The recognition didn't come all at once. It came in layers. The face, then the name, then the context, then the meaning. "Mr. Anders," I said, "I'm the principal." The kitchen went silent. Not the polite kind of silence, where people are waiting for someone to speak. The kind where the air leaves the room and nobody moves, because moving would mean, this is real. Gerald Bishop set his coffee cup down. Martha Bishop looked at her husband. Mr. Kimball opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. My father stared at me. His lips moved before any sound came out, and when the sound came, it was 2 words, repeated. "That's impossible." I didn't respond to that. I reached into my bag and set a folder on the kitchen island, the same island Lauren had installed over the original 1920s floor. The folder contained the firm's portfolio, 12 completed restorations across 4 states, 2 regional preservation awards, a feature in Southern Shelter, a partnership with a Charlotte investor group on a multi-million-dollar mill conversion, revenue figures, client list, team roster. Catherine, the realtor, had seen all of this during due diligence. She'd verified the firm's financials before the offer was accepted. But my father hadn't seen any of it. He hadn't asked. He'd signed the acceptance because the bank said sell, and Lauren said yes, and Diane said it was for the best. He picked up the portfolio with both hands, the way you pick up something that might not be real. He turned the pages slowly. He saw the photographs, the restored parlors, the rebuilt porches, the staircases brought back to their original grain. He saw my name on every project page. He saw the pull quote from the Charlotte Observer. "We don't flip houses, we bring them back." His hands were shaking. Not a lot. Just enough that the pages trembled. He looked at me again, and he said it again, quieter this time, like he was talking to himself. That's impossible. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out Grandma Ruth's brass measuring tape. I set it on the counter next to the folder. Her blueprints are in the car, I said. I'm finishing them. My mother arrived 12 minutes late. I know because Catherine noted the time for the walkthrough log. Diane came through the front door in a navy cardigan and reading glasses, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway the way you stop when you've walked into the wrong room at a party. She looked at me. She looked at the folder on the counter. She looked at my father, who was still holding a page of the portfolio and hadn't spoken since the last time he said those two words. "What is this?" she said. My father told her, or tried to. He said Thea, and the firm, and she's the buyer, and then stopped, because there wasn't a sentence in his vocabulary for what was happening. Diane's face went through 3 phases in about 45 seconds. The first was shock, genuine, the kind you can't fake. The second was calculation. I watched her eyes move from the folder to me, to the bishops, to Mr. Kimball, measuring who knew what and how this would look. The third was tears. "Thea," she said, and her voice cracked on the second syllable. "We're still your family. After everything, we're still family." I didn't move. She stepped toward me. "We made mistakes. We should have listened. But you're here now, and that means something. That means we can fix this." I looked at her. She was crying the way she'd smiled at the will reading, with precision. Every tear calculated for maximum effect, every quiver of the lip aimed at the audience in the room. "You called me your biggest disappointment," I said. The words were flat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Diane's tears stopped. The calculation came back, harder this time. "That was 3 years ago," she said. "People say things." "You didn't just say it," I said. "You planned it. You all did." Her jaw tightened. "I am not the villain here, Thea." I didn't argue. I didn't have to. Every person in that kitchen had heard the words, and the folder on the counter said the rest. I picked up Grandma Ruth's measuring tape and walked to the staircase. The kitchen was behind me. My mother was behind me. The bishops, Mr. Kimball, Catherine, my father, all behind me. I could feel them watching, but I wasn't performing. I was working. The Heartpine staircase was worse than the photos. The water stain ran from the 3rd tread to the 9th, darkening the grain in a pattern that looked like a bruise. The banister wobbled when I touched it. The newel post crack had widened since Megan's photos. You could fit a fingernail in it now. I pulled the brass tape from its case and measured the first tread. 11 3/4 inches. I measured the riser. 7.5. I wrote the numbers in a small notebook I kept in my back pocket. The same way Grandma Ruth wrote her numbers on the blueprints. Small and certain. I measured the banister height, the baluster spacing, the angle of the turn at the landing. I ran my hand along the rail where the finish had worn through to bare wood, and I could feel the decades of palms that had touched it. My grandmother's, my father's, mine when I was small enough to reach up instead of down. Gerald Bishop was standing at the bottom of the stairs. This was the man who told my parents I'd asked him for a loan. This was his wife, Martha, who'd spread concern about me at a church luncheon. They were watching me measure a house they'd helped take from me, with a tape that belonged to the woman who'd built it. I didn't say a word to them. I didn't have to. The measuring tape said it. The notebook said it. The fact that I was standing in this house as the buyer, not the beggar, not the disappointment, not the girl who couldn't even keep a houseplant alive. That said everything Lauren had spent 2 years trying to erase. "Off by an inch on the newel post," I said to Catherine, writing it down. Grandma would have noticed. I came back to the kitchen. My mother was standing with her arms crossed, the tears gone, replaced by something harder. My father hadn't moved. Lauren wasn't there. She'd stayed in the guest cottage, and I hadn't asked about her. This wasn't about Lauren anymore. Mr. Kimball, who'd read the will that erased me 3 years ago, was now holding the purchase contract that put my name on the deed. I spoke to the room, not to anyone in particular. The closing would proceed as scheduled. Larkspur would restore the house to its original 1983 plans, Grandma Ruth's plans. The work would take approximately 8 months. During that time, the guest cottage would remain habitable. I was prepared to offer my parents a lease on the cottage at fair market rate, $750 a month, for up to 1 year, giving them time to find a new arrangement. The lease was a business courtesy. It was not a reconciliation. It was not an invitation. It was not the beginning of a conversation about what they'd done or why. "You're renting us our own home?" my mother said. "It's not your home," I said. "It hasn't been since you signed it over. And after today, it's mine." Diane's face went red. "You ungrateful." She stopped herself. Not because she didn't have the words, but because Gerald and Martha Bishop were standing 4 feet away, and the story Diane Anders told in this town depended on her being the reasonable one. "I'm saving the house," I said. "I'm not saving the story you told about me." My father looked at the floor. Diane looked at the Bishops. The Bishops looked at each other. Mr. Kimball closed his folder. The room had nothing left to say. We signed the closing papers the following Monday in Mr. Kimball's office on 2nd Street, 3 blocks from the furniture store that no longer existed. The transaction was clean. Title transferred to Larkspur Design plus Build, LLC. The lien was satisfied. The bank was paid. Lauren, who attended by phone because she couldn't face the room, said 3 words the entire call. "I understand, and yes." My father sat across the table from me and signed where Mr. Kimball pointed. When it was done, when the keys were in my hand and the deed was filed, and the house on Putnam Street belonged to the firm I'd built with rice dinners and a brass measuring tape, my father looked at me one more time. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say he was proud. He said those 2 words again, barely above a whisper, like a man testing the weight of something he couldn't put down. "That's impossible." I didn't correct him. I put the keys in my pocket, next to the tape. I walked out of the office and stood on 2nd Street and looked at the sky over Marietta, which was the same gray it had been the morning I'd left. Then I went to the house. I pinned Grandma Ruth's original blueprints to the kitchen wall, the same wall where Lauren's gray paint was already peeling, and I started making notes. Tread depth, riser height, baluster spacing. The staircase would be first. The restoration took 7 months. Nathan drove up from Asheville with a 2-man crew, and we brought in a local Finnish carpenter who'd done work on 3 other homes in the Putnam Street Historic District. We replaced the porch columns. We reglazed the bay windows with wavy glass sourced from a salvage yard in Zanesville. We stripped Lauren's gray paint and repapered the dining room with a reproduction of the original pattern, not Vermont this time, but a mill in Pennsylvania that matched the colorway within a shade. And the staircase. We repaired every tread. We stabilized the newel post with a hidden steel rod and refinished the banister by hand, the way Grandma Ruth had done it 40 years before. The heart pine glowed again. The grain showed through. When you walked up the stairs and put your hand on the rail, you could feel the smoothness of 100 years of palms, mine now among them. My parents moved out of the guest cottage after 9 months. 1 month past the lease, which I extended without comment. They bought a small ranch house on the other side of town. My father sent me a check for the extra month's rent. I deposited it. We didn't speak. Lauren sold the Range Rover. She took a bookkeeping job in Parkersburg. Her husband filed for separation. I heard this from Megan, and I didn't ask for details, because Lauren's consequences were hers. I didn't build them. I didn't celebrate them. I just let them be. Larkspur used the Putnam Street house as our Ohio flagship. The before and after photos ran in 2 publications. Nathan said it was the best work we'd ever done. I told him it was the only house I'd ever restored that already knew my name. The brass measuring tape sits in a glass case in my studio now, next to the cedar box and the blueprints. I don't use it on projects anymore. The numbers are too worn. But I keep it where I can see it, because it reminds me of something I needed 3 years to learn. The person they crossed off the will was the only one who ever knew how to build something that lasts, and your family's permission was never the thing that made you worth anything. That's my story. A house my grandmother saved. A name they crossed off. And a brass measuring tape that outlasted every word they used against me. If someone once told you that you'd never amount to anything, go build the quiet life that proves them wrong, and let that be enough. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.